We're going to let, they're gonna let us in real quick.
Okay, have we started yet?
Started.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to call to order the board meeting of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority for Friday, October 15th. We'll begin with the roll call. Ann, if you could call that, please.
Yes, sir. Okay. Good morning, Chair Pine and Authority Board. I will be calling the roll call now. Please unmute yourself for me. Supervisor Joya, Supervisor Peskin.
Present.
Director Holman.
Here.
Supervisor Gorin. Councilmember Hahn.
Present.
Councilmember Livia.
Yeah, if there was Lieber, I'm here.
Lieber, sorry. Chair Pine.
Present.
And we have a quorum.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, this is the opportunity in the meeting for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any public comment today, Madam Clerk?
We have 2 hands raised right now. Chris, if you can put them in.
Okay, let's see. I see. Why don't we ask?
Bring Joshua in.
All right. How about Jeremy Lowe? Would you like to add some comments?
Joshua's already in the panelist list. He should be
okay
soon.
Josh, you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I didn't hear that I was called on. Thank you and good morning, Chair Pine and members of the board. I'm Josh Quigley with Save the Bay, and I just wanted to provide the board with an update on advocacy efforts that we've been participating in to increase state and federal funding for bay restoration in ways that would support the projects that the Restoration Authority is able to finance with Measure AA funds. On the state side, this year we had a great opportunity, first in discussions over a climate resilience bond, and then through the budget when the state realized a significant surplus. So we were participating in and led a broad coalition to support Assemblymember Mullen's push for dedicated funding to accelerate habitat restoration around the bay as a defense against sea level rise. While a specific set aside was not ultimately included in the final climate resilience budget package, the package does include $500 million in the coming years for the Coastal Conservancy to support coastal resilience projects, which bay projects should qualify for. So we're very grateful to Mr. Mullen for his strong leadership on this, and we'll continue working with him in the next budget cycle to identify ways to expand funding to support bay restoration from the state so that our shoreline and threatened communities can stay ahead of sea level rise. On the federal side, we've been working with Representative Speer and Senators Feinstein and Padilla to pass the SFBRA Restoration Act, which would create a permanent program office at the EPA and increase federal funding for bay restoration. We've been looking at opportunities to advance that bill this session, particularly on the Senate side. And I would encourage you all to express your interest and support for passing this bill this year in any discussions that you have with our senators and Speaker Pelosi's offices. And then lastly, I just want to remind everyone that October is when we celebrate Bay Day. And just like last year, we're expanding the celebration throughout the entire month. And this is a great opportunity to encourage your constituents to connect with the Bay by exploring the Bay Trail or taking part in other outdoor activities on the shoreline and on the Bay. This year, we have ways for people to form teams and track their activities for chances to win great prizes. And thanks to Chair Pine, Supervisor Joya, and others for helping to spread the word already to your constituents. Anybody interested in more information can go to bayday.org. That's bayday.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for your advocacy and for the group that came together to do the advocacy over this legislative session. We'll hear more about that from our interim executive officer later in the meeting. Our next public speaker is Jeremy Lowe. We have you, Jeremy?
Yes, he's coming on now.
Okay, good morning, Chair Pine and members of the board. My name is Jeremy Lowe. I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco S Institute, SFBRA. Several topics have come up recently in the media which reinforce the need for coordination and collaboration for both restoration and adaptation in the Bay. An item that has made the news lately is the idea of a storm surge barrier at the Golden Gate or at Dumbarton Bridge. This idea is raised every few years to provide a single solution to flooding and focuses resources in one area. However, there are fundamental reasons that make a barrier in the Bay unworkable. Over time, the barrier will need to close more frequently as sea level rises. Many studies have shown that the frequent closure of a barrier will impact the Bay and the Delta. Water quality will be degraded by reducing mixing and exchange with the ocean. And the tidal wetlands, which we are restoring, will be severely damaged by the reduction in tidal action. The main driver to build a barrier is to reduce the cost. To limit the closing of the barrier, it'll have to be raised as sea level rises. And so the levees around it will also need to be raised, negating the economic benefit. However, this discussion of barriers has highlighted the need to better explain viable adaptation strategies for the Bay, how the natural features of marshes and beaches can work with traditional levees and seawalls, and why barriers are not suitable for an estuary such as San Francisco Bay. If written in an accessible form, such an explanation could help inform communities and other stakeholders and allow them to play a more active role in shoreline planning as envisaged by Bay Adapt. You may also have seen recent articles in the media on modeling undertaken by UC Berkeley and Stanford of the economic impacts of hardening one shoreline and its effects on other parts of the Bay. Marshes dissipate tidal energy, while seawalls reflect energy to other parts of the Bay. If you have more energy, this means higher water levels, more flooding, and more damage. The research modeled two scenarios, a soft shoreline of marshes and mudflats, and a hard shoreline of a seawall located in the waters of the Bay. Their research supports the overall strategy of restoring marshes and setting back levees as it creates a soft shoreline with more energy dissipation and less reflection of energy. While the model reduction in water levels is not large, this does indicate the need to coordinate marsh restoration and levee construction around the Bay. We can build on this modeling, collaborating with the universities to help understand more how the marshes we are restoring can play more of a role in the protection of our communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy, for your comments. Thank you for your recent op-ed as well that was published in the Chronicle on the issue of the tidal barrier. Do we have any other further public comment today? I don't see any hands raised.
No, sir, no other hands are raised.
Okay. We'll move to the board to ask if the board members have any announcements or information they'd like to share.
We have a hand raised from Councilmember Hahn.
Director Hahn.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I was able to attend the State of the Estuary Conference on October 1 and thank Caitlin Sweeney for running that beautifully. It was very interesting and well done. I particularly enjoyed the presentations from Karina Gould and Valentin Lopez, the Native American representatives. They're very powerful. And I also wanted to say that here in Berkeley, I and some of my colleagues have been also advertising this Save the Bay Month activities, and hopefully folks from Berkeley have been participating in that and wanted to thank them for that initiative as well.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for those efforts. Seeing no other hands raised, in terms of my chair report, the main thing I wanted to report to the board on was that I've had the opportunity to participate in the interview process for the new executive officer for the Coastal Conservancy, who also serves as the executive officer of the Restoration Authority. So there are some excellent candidates. I was fortunate to have the chance to participate in those interviews, and that process is moving towards a conclusion. Amy, I'll turn over to you for your executive report.
Great, thank you. Yeah, this is Amy Hutzel, the interim EO, and I texted Sam Shookett this morning just to let him know we were missing him. The first thing I wanted to talk about was just following up on Josh Quigley's notes about federal and state funding for San Francisco Bay. And on the federal side, there are two bills, S 1906 on the Senate side and HR 610 by Jackie Spear, that would create a statutory geographic program within US EPA for San Francisco Bay. So that would provide a much more robust, resilient framework for EPA funding for San Francisco Bay versus the year-to-year relatively small appropriations that have been coming for San Francisco Bay. And it would be similar to statutory programs that exist for Chesapeake Bay and Puget Sound and other estuaries around the country. It's not entirely clear if these bills are going to make it through Congress this year. I would just reiterate what Josh Quigley said. If you can voice your support for these, particularly to the senators and also to Speaker Pelosi, that would be fantastic. And then on the appropriation side, things are moving along with funding for the EPA geographic program. So the House bill, the Interior Appropriations Bill, includes $30 million for the EPA program for FY 21-22. And there's not much happening on the Senate side right now with the appropriations for that, but that would be well, it's been $5 million a year, so that would be a six-fold increase over what we've seen in the past for EPA. And then separate from that, the Senate passed the infrastructure package, which included $24 million for San Francisco Bay, spread over 5 years. So on various fronts in terms of authorizations and appropriations, things are moving along with getting increased funding for EPA for San Francisco Bay. And thanks to Save the Bay and many others for working on that. And then on the state funding side, the governor signed a $3.7 billion climate resilience package recently. That is spread over 3 years. So there are some funds made available this fiscal year, and then other parts of the funding would be in future bills, budget bills. And as Josh mentioned, the State Coastal Conservancy would receive $500 million total for coastal resilience, with $350 million next fiscal year, FY 22-23, and then $150 million the following fiscal year. So at this point, we do not have, funding in hand, but all signs look very positive. And at the Coastal Conservancy, we are starting up a strategic planning process so that we're ready on July 1st of next year to really get that funding out into on-the-ground projects on the coast and in San Francisco Bay. And the legislation related to the $500 million does reference that projects that would be eligible for San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority funding could be funded with this $500 million. And then related to that, Ocean Protection Council will be receiving a total of $100 million, $50 million next year and $50 million the year after for coastal wetlands restoration. So we plan to work very closely with the Ocean Protection Council on coordinating our work between the coastal resilience funding and the coastal wetlands restoration funding. So that's the update on federal and state budgets of interest. I don't know if you had any questions on those before we move on to the board meeting schedule. Okay, great. So we did put together a board meeting schedule for next calendar year, and it is in your package. It's item 6A. So we want to have you adopt or consider adoption of Resolution 80, which would set the board meeting schedule for next year. And I did just want to give a little context to this, and this is related to our December meeting too. So there was legislation that allows virtual meetings for local agencies until January 1st of 2024. If there's a declared state of emergency and if state or local officials are recommending social distancing. One of the little details of this legislation is that the local agency has to make findings every 30 days in order to continue to meet via teleconference. So this meeting, this is fine that we're holding this via teleconference. If we plan to do a teleconference in December, then our legal counsel has recommended that we pull together a very short board meeting in the middle of November so that you can make a finding so that we can continue to do teleconferences. And then we would have to do that every 30 days. So going into 2022, yeah, we'll have to really decide whether we want to start meeting at the Metro Center or if we want to and are able to meet every 30 days and are able to make those findings. So that's a little context about the teleconference versus in-person meetings. But Anne, I think we wanted to move Resolution 80 forward for a vote.
Thank you, Ms. Hutzel. So we have action to take here. We have the schedule.
Sorry, sir, we do have a hand raised.
Director Hahn.
I was just going to make a motion.
Thank you.
So I move adoption of Resolution 80 to approve the 2022 Governing Board meeting schedule as set forth in the memorandum for item 6A.
Second.
We have a motion by Hahn and a second by Eskin. We'll take the roll call, please.
Yes, sir.
Public comment.
And check if there's any public comment.
No public comment, sir.
Then
I will go ahead and take the roll. All right, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes, no, I'm unmuted, yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 6A is approved.
Thank you.
Great. And then item 6B on the EO report is a memo on report on expenditures under delegated authority and very minor expenditures over the past 6 months, totaling just over $1,000. And then item 6C, Taylor is going to present on the annual report.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Pine, members of the governing board. Item 6C is a one-page summary of the fiscal year that ended at the end of June 2021. And this one-page summary is a product that we make at the suggestion of the advisory committee, who wanted just kind of a quick snapshot of what happened in the fiscal, right at the end of the fiscal year, since the annual report process takes several months to get finalized. So this is exactly what that is. And it's built on a template, so it will look like this year after year after year. And the two charts that are on there are sort of our hallmark charts of our campaign progress against campaign objectives and funding broken down by region, which you will see. And thematically, the summary and I anticipate the annual report itself will really focus on the diversity of projects that we funded last fiscal year, in terms of going into the subtitle zone, going up the shoreline as well, and the ongoing progress we're making towards implementing equity as a main focus in all of our work. So last year was a really big year for funding projects. We had 13 projects in all, in addition to the ongoing commitment to funding the shoreline project. So we authorized, right around $25 million. So it was a good year for spending money. And some of these were really great, big landscape scale projects. And some of them were more pilot projects. And this was also the year that we adopted Resolution 70, which formally centered equity in all of our work and committed to the recommendations to make, to give teeth to that notion of centering equity, and committed to annual reporting on our implementation of the equity recommendations, which I think you're hearing about later today. And we officially created the community grants program and awarded the first grant in that program all last year. So it's also, we're kind of at a nice moment where projects funded in the first couple funding rounds are starting to hit major milestones, or they're even starting to complete, like Encinal Dunes in Alameda. If you haven't been down there, I recommend. It's a wonderful spot. And that's done. 900 Innes has broken ground. Montezuma, as you guys all saw over the summer, has breached. So it's really exciting times. It's really nice for me to be able to talk about things that people can go visit and see, and see this funding making a big difference on the shoreline. And we also decided that next year we'll mark sort of the 5 years. It'll be our 5th funding round. Measure A passed in 2016, but next year we will have 5 years worth of projects authorized to talk about. So we anticipate trying to make in the next funding or in the next annual reporting cycle to really talk about the 5-year milestones that we've hit. So that is, my apologies. I meant to share my screen, but you all have it in your packet. You can look at it independently. That is a very quick overview of a very quick summary. And the advisory committee has put together an ad hoc subcommittee on the annual report. So I will be working with them going forward on the steps to creating the full report, which we will bring back to you at subsequent meetings. With that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
I had one question for you, Taylor. What's the plan for disseminating this report? I think it's very valuable. You get this out quickly, and the one-page format is very, very accessible for the reader. So what's the plan for distributing this?
Well, now that it's been shown to you, we'll put it on our channels. It's on the website already, and then the advisory committee has very kindly offered to help put out our products through their channels. So I think it'll mostly be us using our channels, and then the advisory committee, because they've got good reach into a lot of our stakeholder groups, rolling it to theirs. And of course, if you guys would like to put it in any of your newsletters and communications, that would be great as well.
Okay. Ms. Hahn?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to note for maybe future board meeting, I was interested in what the barriers are to the restoration of shellfish habitat and the aquatic vegetation habitat. I noted that those don't have much progress. And at another time, I would be interested in knowing, you know, what are the barriers there and how we might be engaging the right organizations and jurisdictions so that those goals can move forward. And the Bay Trail is also a little low, but I think that there may be some projects in this round that address that, but that also could be interesting to understand what the special challenges are. That's all.
Okay, we'll make a note that we would, at a future meeting, have an update on those items. Okay, this is an information item. Any further comments? Or any comments from the public?
No, sir.
Okay. Then we can move on to item 7, which is the approval of our minutes. Are there any requested changes to the minutes or modifications? Otherwise, we could take a motion to approve them.
Move approval.
I'll second that. Any public comment?
No public comment, sir.
And if you could kindly take the roll, please.
Sure. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Aye.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. The minutes are approved.
Thank you. We'll move now to a presentation on the Sonoma Creek Baleen strategy. I believe Kendall Webster and Jeremy Lowe will lead us through this.
Great.
All right, we can see your slides.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kendall Webster. I work for Sonoma Land Trust in our Baylands program. And I'm very excited to talk to you today about the Sonoma Creek Baylands strategy, which was made possible by funding from the Restoration Authority. The picture that you see on this first slide is of the Sonoma Creek Baylands region of Sonoma County. It was taken during the wet winter of 2019, and the extensive flooding that you see on this picture is one of the issues addressed via development of this strategy. Next slide, please. So this is my presentation outline. I'll talk you through a bit of the historic context, goals of the study area, design alternative, cost of implementation, public access, and then the next steps. Okay, next slide. These are our funders and project partners. We completed the strategy report document in May 2020. I want to give special thanks to Jessica Davenport, our Restoration Authority grant manager, and Jeremy Lowe from San Francisco Estuary Institute, our lead consultant on this project. Next slide. As we know, 90% of tidal marsh and 70% of freshwater wetlands in the San Francisco Bay have been lost to diking since the 1850s. Here's what that loss of historic wetlands looks like in the North Bay. The blue shading on the map on the right shows the historic extent of tidal and freshwater wetlands before these lands were diked and drained. And the map on the, that's the map on the left. And the map on the right shows the modern North Bay shoreline that we're all familiar with. Sonoma Land Trust and our partners have been working to restore the lost wetlands in our region. The green and gold shading on the right-hand map shows the approximately 6,500 acres that have been protected and or restored in the Sonoma Baylands since the 1980s. Next slide. We initiated the Sonoma Creek Bayland Strategy in 2018 as the first step toward implementing the recommendations of the Baylands Ecosystem Habitat Goals Project, which calls for a continuous band of tidal marsh and other wetlands from Novato to Vallejo and implementation of the restoration projects by 2030 to ensure that marshes are established before the rate of sea level rise accelerates toward the middle of the century. It's important to point out that the North Bay is identified as one of the best regions for landscape scale tidal wetland restoration in the whole Bay Area. Tidal marsh restoration and habitat creation are the main goals of this work. We also looked for ways to reduce flood depth and duration along Highway 121 near the town of Sonoma and on private property, and ways to control flows through the State Route 37 Sonoma and Tole Creek bridges. We provided recommendations to the State Route 37 redesign and Smart Rail line and identified guidelines for public access. Our planning horizon is through 2100, and we assume sea level rise of up to 6.9 feet. Next slide, please. So the white line on this map, the white outline, is our study area for the strategy. And it's shown in the context of the upper watershed, including the town of Sonoma. So that's up toward the north, and then you have the San Pablo Bay at the south of this map. Highways are symbolized by the red line. You can see State Route 37 in the foreground and State Route 121 toward the back. You should see a yellow and black Smart Rail line. This entire study area is approximately 25,000 acres. Much of this acreage is already under conservation, but the majority of the land is still private. So in development of the strategy, we spoke to many of the private property owners in the study area. Our ability to implement full restoration will be contingent upon the willingness of these private property owners to sell their land. So our wetland restoration evaluation is concentrated in the approximately 11,000 acres in the diked baylands portion of this planning area. California Ridgeways rail, California black rail, salt marsh harvest mouse, Chinook salmon, and steelhead are endangered, threatened, or species of special concern that we intend to benefit with this restoration work. Next slide, please. These are photographs showing the impacts of flooding on the built infrastructure in this region. The big picture on the left and the little one on the top right are of the Smart Rail line. And then the little picture on the bottom right is of an intersection on State Route 121. It's important to point out that on one hand, this project is interested in protecting critical infrastructure from flooding and sea level rise. And on the other hand, some of this built infrastructure is an impediment to realizing our restoration goals. Another major constraint in this region is that most of these dike baylands properties are significantly subsided below sea level, which poses a challenge to marsh restoration, as we need to identify large quantities of fill material to bring these properties up to marsh elevation. Next slide, please. The study considered 4 design alternatives, which we evaluated in a hydrological computer model under high flow and tide conditions and with sea level rise. So the colorful green and green and gray shading on the map is the 11,000 acres of diked baylands within the study area, which is where our evaluation concentrated. Today, I'm going to talk about the design alternative that we selected for implementation because it best meets our habitat and flood reduction goals. This alternative restores the maximum area of marsh and mudflat in the study area, approximately 11,000 acres, and connects uplands to marsh where possible. This design removes levees to alleviate flooding, but rather than routing the resulting increased tidal volume through the existing creek and slough channels, new channels would be excavated across the diked properties, and those are the blue lines on the map. And this routes tidal volume through the center of the properties. The fill excavated to dig the new channels would be placed to help achieve elevation and habitat complexity and reduce erosion from wind waves. So the existing tidal channels will help, excavating new tidal channels will help preserve the approximately 1,300 acres of high marsh habitat that has established in the creek and slough channels over the past 150 years since reclamation began. And that an example of what that habitat looks like is in the picture on the screen. By routing the majority of the tidal volume through the center of the restored properties, this existing high marsh is preserved, and vegetation in the high marsh is used as the backbone of revegetation within the restored properties. This alternative also places emphasis on the top part of the Sonoma Creek alluvial fan, which is, you can see that little A on the map, that's the alluvial fan area. So this area receives sediment from the upper watershed, and through this strategy, increasing hydrological connectivity here will allow sediment to move more freely throughout the restored area. We like this alternative because it builds on existing habitat, which will protect species and provide for a faster establishment of new tidal marsh while reducing flooding. So speaking of flooding, this slide shows the flood reduction benefits of implementing the full 11,000 acre restoration project. The big map, so the main map, shows the north end of the study area around State Route 121, which is where flooding really impacts services and infrastructure and residences. So the blue shading is places where flooding is removed entirely. And the green shows places where flood elevations are reduced. And you can see the red areas are places where flooding is actually increased, but the red areas also coincide with restored tidal marsh areas. The take home from this slide is that the restoration project will reduce the depth of floodwaters as well as the duration of time that flooding affects the study area. Oh my goodness, I didn't ask you to switch the slide on that one. So would you sorry about that. So yes, again, the blue is where we're getting rid of flooding altogether. The green is the reduced flooding areas, and the red is where flooding is increased, but those are tidal restoration areas anyway. Okay, next slide, thank you. So one of the most important elements of this strategy report is that it provides a robust cost estimate of implementation. The total restored area is 11,300 acres. The combined cost of design, permitting, and restoration construction is $210 million, and it'll cost $172 million just to protect the built infrastructure in the region from the restoration. So our total project cost is $381 million. I would like to note that this total does not include the cost of property acquisition or long-term property stewardship, which combined are estimated to cost an additional $45 to $50 million. Next slide, please. During the development of this strategy, we met with staff from Bay Trail, Water Trail, and Sonoma County Regional Parks. We also participated in the Resilient by Design project that addressed public access along the State Route 37 corridor. Rather than identifying specific locations for access, we developed the guiding principles for public access that you see on this screen. Essentially, we will address access on a project basis. We also encourage increasing access where there are existing recreation opportunities. Next slide, please. So we're working hard to implement this ambitious strategy. Some of the next steps toward implementation include a project located in the alluvial fan of Sonoma Creek, which we hope will be funded by FEMA. We're also working on acquisition of a large ranch property in the middle of the study area, which we hope to bring before this board at your December meeting. This strategy also provides basis for comments to lengthen the Tole Creek Bridge for Caltrans's State Route 37, State Route 116 to Mare Island interim traffic congestion relief project. And it also provides the basis for a list of near and long-term State Route 37 redesign mitigation opportunities for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Caltrans. There's even more in the pipeline toward implementation, and I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you about those projects as they develop. Next slide. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. This is our contact information, and I would be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Very good. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. There's an opportunity for questions from the board. Ms. Hahn?
Apologies, I'm trying to leave room for my colleagues, but then I don't want to miss a chance and have us move on. Thank you so much. I read this with great interest. It's a very ambitious project and very exciting. So was happy to hear about the work you're doing, and it's always interesting to see a 100-year timeline. I think these areas were destroyed probably in 25 or 50. And it's just incredible. If you add, I guess, the time that's already been spent, it's probably 150 years to restore it. I had one technical question that is just simply something I did not understand in the report, the written report. You probably don't need to look at it. You probably know the answer. But it said most of the diked baylands properties are at or below low water. This means tidal flow volume following levee breaching is the maximum it can be and will not increase with future sea level rise. I just did not understand the mechanics of that.
Thank you so much for that question. And I am so glad that I have Jeremy here on the line to answer these technical questions.
So the volume that goes in and out of a marsh in each tide is between mean low water and mean high water. So if it's a deeply subsided site, then there'll be a much larger volume of water than if it's a mature marsh, because the mature marsh is much closer to mean high water. However, if you actually subside below mean low water, that's subtidal. So it's not going to change on each tide. So we're concerned about how much the volume of water that goes in and out of the marsh on each tide. The maximum amount is between mean low water, mean high water. What we have in Sonoma Creek is these very deeply subsided sites. So they're at the maximum volume that could go in and out. So then when we're working with Caltrans and MTC on the size of the bridges that you need to let that water go through under Highway 37, we can tell them this is the maximum amount, but you should plan for it because we could have that amount. Does that help?
It helped somewhat. I didn't understand why sea level rise wouldn't change that. Is it because the volumes all sit below essentially sea level?
Yeah, the ground surface is already below mean low water. With sea level rise is just going to increase the elevation of mean low water and mean high water higher. So the volumes are going to stay the same, but the elevation will change.
All right. Well, I will further study that.
Please email us with questions if you have some.
Yeah.
And let me see if I also had a question. You said that there were, that the whole project is very contingent on the willingness of owners to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious, why isn't eminent domain an option here? I assume these parcels many of them aren't being used in any particularly productive manner, and there is a strong public purpose. Is there a reason why that is not a method for assembling these parcels?
It is a method. I think that we, the Sonoma Land Trust's relationship with landowners, we hold sacred because all of our work in the county and around the North Bay is contingent on the same principle. So, we have to be very careful and respect their private property rights. And, I say it's contingent on their willingness to sell, and it is. And a lot of them are interested in selling because you're right. I mean, the ag that's going on out there it's expensive, and there's generational changes. So we are seeing a lot of willing sellers.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I suppose that could be something that a public agency could do at some point if there's difficulties.
Potentially, yes.
It makes sense that it's not something you have the right to do, but
we certainly don't. Yes.
Right, but a public agency could support your work in that way. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that question. And I think some public agencies do have that authority, and certainly like East Bay Parks with the example of Dotson Marsh, they did use eminent domain. The State Coastal Conservancy, for example, we cannot fund an acquisition that doesn't involve a willing seller. And I'd need to go back and look at the Restoration Authority, the enabling legislation. But I think there's a likelihood the authority would have trouble doing that as well. Oh, good. A lawyer, Amy Roach.
I can just comment on that. The authority, the Restoration Authority does not have the authority to acquire land. So the authority itself wouldn't have the ability to acquire land by eminent domain. The Coastal Conservancy actually does have that authority, but numerous of the bond acts that we implement have provisions in them that restrict the use of bond funds to acquiring land from willing sellers. But yes, there are other entities, Sonoma County and other entities that could use eminent domain to acquire land in that area.
Well, thank you. I wasn't necessarily advocating for it, but I think the initial comment made me think that maybe owners were not willing to sell. But I think it's been clarified that sounds like there's a lot of people to work with who may be willing to sell. So eminent domain is not usually the first line of defense, but it can be used if needed by some agencies and could be a tool. So that was it.
Ms. Holman?
My question was related, so maybe this is just clarifying the prior question, which is help me understand why an owner wouldn't be willing to sell, because it's hard to imagine there's much use going on these lands currently. But I did notice there was $172 million for infrastructure protection. That doesn't necessarily mean buildings, but it could. So what would be the impediment that would cause an owner not to be willing to sell? And are these lands being actually used?
We haven't come across many landowners who are black and white, not willing to sell. I think that the impediments that we're having toward, moving more quickly on acquisition of these lands are primarily financial. These are expensive properties. They're Sonoma County properties. Even though they're farmland, they still are costly for acquisition. And so we also have capacity issues. It's a matter of us needing to move really quickly, and we're in the process of growing our team, growing our partnerships. And I think that the more we talk to people out there, the more they'll be interested in working with us.
So I think you answered one of the questions. So a lot of these lands that you're talking about are used for farming?
They are, yes.
Okay. So infrastructure would be like farm buildings, homes.
The road and the rail line are the major infrastructure protection costs.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions? Or anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item?
We do have one hand up from the public.
I see Mr. Lawrence Abbott. Welcome.
We're going to move them over.
Mr. Abbott, is happy to hear your comments.
Hi, it just took a while before I got the message that said unmute. So I have two quick questions. One is the amount of money I imagine is itemized that's estimated for the total cost. I'm just wondering what are the primary costs that bring the cost so high. And then the other part of my question is that I'm all for restoring wetlands that are lost, very much so as a wildlife biologist. But in the face of rising sea level, and we're kind of basing, I think you said a little over 6 feet. That's sort of based on old models, and it could be accelerating and much higher than that. And if we keep raising land around the bay, there is virtually nothing in the models that says that acceleration will slow down. It's more likely to increase at a geometric curve, and be very, very, very many feet deeper. Eventually, we'll have a sort of a levee system that just keeps getting higher and higher. At what point should we not put so much money into raising land, but giving up land that will be eventually covered with water, and sort of plan for that now and start investing for that now as we sort of create steps for habitat and wildlife to move further inland and to higher elevation? Those are my 2 questions.
I think that's your second point, that observation is something that we've been thinking about a lot as a team. And when we wrote this paper, we knew about the acceleration of sea level rise. I mean, we also know that data is evolving. So we finished in 2020. We have new information now, and we're aware that that's the information that we're getting is sort of just constantly changing, and that the way that we're thinking about this restoration is getting it in place before 2030. Having marsh establishment, and that includes removing levees, increasing connectivity, so that when in 2030 and beyond, sea level rise becomes a real and accelerating problem, we won't be caught off guard with, levees, breaches, and failures all over the place, creating a much more costly problem than tackling it head on now. I think that our post 2100 vision for this region it's probably going to be a lot of shallow subtidal. And that, somebody brought up submerged aquatic habitat. I think that is what we'd be looking at long term. But the connections that we make now from the restored wetlands into the uplands, buying those lands, connecting the baylands properties into the uplands, into the higher elevation, will provide opportunities for species to move, and will also provide opportunities for the marsh to migrate upwards. So it is expensive. It's a big price tag, but it's a lot smaller than having to deal with the mess that we'll be in, post 2030, if we don't do anything now. Basically, that's my answer to that second question.
Great answer. Thank you.
And then the first question, you asked, and it's timely. We've been talking a lot internally in Sonoma Land Trust about this big cost, and needing to put together a fundraising plan for it. We're really grateful to the state of California for allocating so much money in this year's budget toward climate resilience, and to the Restoration Authority for funding and being able to fund these types of projects, as well as Coastal Conservancy. The per acre, I think, restoration cost is around $30,000, between $30,000 and $36,000. And if you look at the restoration cost of the South Bay Salt Ponds project, that per acre value is around the same amount. So it's actually, the big ticket items in the restoration costs are these big excavated channels that we're talking about putting in. There's also the construction logistics of getting sediment into this region and to create elevation complexity. Those are expensive, and also, I mean, that $172 million price tag of protecting infrastructure, I mean, that's real. That's a big bite out of this budget. So that's where those costs are coming from. I hope that answered your question, Lawrence.
It did. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I think we're ready now to move to, this is an information item. So again, appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
We can move forward to item 9, which is the a grant item for the Boston Marsh. So let's see who will be picking that one up. That's Miss Tong.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Pine and members of the board and members of the public. My name is Linda Tong, and today I'm going to be talking about the Evolving Shorelines project at Bothin Marsh. Staff recommends that the authority disperse up to $255,000 to Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy to develop schematic designs for enhancing Bothin Marsh open space preserve. Sorry, 1 second. And realigning a segment of the Bay Trail in Marin County. The Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy and Marin County Parks are co-managing this effort to adapt the tidal marsh complex to sea level rise and ensure continued public access to the shoreline. The preserve is located along the shoreline of Upper Richardson Bay in Marin County. The preserve's trails provide shoreline public access and serve as part of a multimodal transportation network. The segment of Bay Trail that runs through the preserve connects Mill Valley to the north to Marin City and Sausalito. Bothin Marsh's 67 acres of tidal wetlands range from subtidal mudflats to low marsh to high marsh with limited transition zone and upland habitats. Richardson Bay is located on the Pacific Flyway, which is a major flyway for migratory birds through North and South America. Mudflats are exposed at low tide, providing important feeding areas for shorebirds and habitat for small crustaceans. The Bothin Marsh Open Space Preserve is Marin County Park's most visited park unit and the most vulnerable to sea level rise. The Bay Trail segment that runs through the preserve already experiences flooding and will be increasingly compromised. The project includes several potential improvements, including the following: elevating and realigning a segment of the Bay Trail along South Bothin Marsh and elevating a segment of the Bay Trail along North Bothin Marsh, constructing ecotone slopes along trail embankments through thin lift sediment placement, establishing fluvial connectivity between Coyote Creek and South Bothin Marsh, and enhancing tidal action and connectivity between Richardson Bay and South Bothin Marsh and North Bothin Marsh, creating marsh mounds and beach habitat and subtidal mudflat habitat, and exploring opportunities to beneficially reuse dredged material through collaboration and partnerships with Marin County Flood Control and nearby marina managers. Since 2017, the Parks Conservancy and Marin County Parks have partnered to commission scientific studies of the project site, engage the community to develop a shared vision for the preserve, and initiate conceptual design with a consultant team led by Wallace Roberts and Todd LLC and Environmental Science Associates. The project has just completed conceptual design funded through a partnership between Marin Community Foundation and the California State Coastal Conservancy. And in the upcoming phase of the project team aims to continue community engagement and to refine the preferred concept into a schematic design. The preferred concept would provide more ecological function than other alternatives by realigning the existing segment of Bay Trail and allowing the marsh to be reconnected to the bay. There's been a lot of public engagement for this project. Since the fall of 2018, the project team has engaged over 900 community members at events such as kayak tours, biking event, local farmers markets and community events, and community happy hours. During the conceptual design phase in 2020, the project team had to scale back in-person engagement due to COVID-19, but the project team was still able to present initial design elements and the adaptation concepts to the community through virtual happy hours. They've also presented to several local groups, such as the Mill Valley Safe Routes to School Task Force and the Marin County Open Space Commission. A feedback survey regarding the concepts got feedback from hundreds of community members through fall of 2020. And community members have been reached through partnerships with groups such as the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, Mill Valley Library and Recreation Departments, Marin Community Clinic, and Marin City Library. These efforts have led to strong community support for this project, and staff recommends funding the next planning phase of the project, which, when constructed and monitored, would provide habitat and public access benefits while serving as a pilot project in nature-based sea level rise adaptation. And that's all for my brief presentation. I'd like to introduce Rob Laporte and Claire Mooney from Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy to say a few words, and we'd be available for any questions you all have. I believe both are in the audience right now.
Very good. So we need to move them over, Ann?
Yes, please.
Yes, they're getting moved over right now, sir.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to join today. We're so appreciative of the Restoration Authority. My name is Claire Mooney, and I'm the Vice President for Park Places and Innovation with the Parks Conservancy. So excited about this opportunity and partnership with Marin County Parks. I'd love to invite the project manager for this project, Rob Laporte, to speak a little bit more to the possibilities.
Hello, everyone. Again, thanks for the opportunity to speak and that you're considering our project today. Just wanted to say that this project is a really high priority of the One-Time collaboration, which is an effort to work across all of the different public lands in Marin County to steward them collectively. And yeah, this project at Bothene Marsh would support restoring natural processes to a really unique and important tidal wetland, which is relatively uncommon in Richardson Bay and this region of Southern Marin. And it would allow us to just maintain this really key link in Southern Marin's carbon-free transportation network. And I also just wanted to say that Bothene Marsh is in a unique position just because it is so highly visible. It's literally in the front yard of tens of thousands of residents and along Highway 1 and 101, which is a really major transportation corridor, and you can just look down at the marsh from those roadways. And with that, I feel like this is a really key opportunity to highlight a lot of the Restoration Authority's work to restore our bay and maintain the Bay Trail for future generations. So thank you again for your consideration today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. Your comment is well taken that this is very public, a very publicly accessible, very publicly known site, and very exciting, the plans for its upgrade and restoration. Do we have comments, questions from the board?
No, sir.
And we can ask for public comments or input. Like Mr. Abbott has raised his hand.
Yeah, similar question as before. concerning the part of the trail that goes through the open water, with sea level rise accelerating, does it make sense to continually keep raising that? Or would either a floating system work, which is probably too expensive, or just rerouting it along the high shoreline and not having it go through through the middle of the open water? That's it for my question.
Yeah, great question, and happy to address that. Currently, the segment of the Bay Trail through Bothine Marsh, it was constructed on a former railroad embankment and turned into a trail in the 1980s. And it does go right through the middle of the tidal wetlands. And the designs that we are going to advance would actually look at realigning the trail to the perimeter of the open space preserve and along the uplands and next to the adjacent community. And we think that that'll provide a lot of opportunity to actually enhance the wetlands by removing the embankment and human activity from the marsh.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any further hands from the public. So we'll come back to the board. This is an action item. Unless there's further comment, we can take a motion. You do have a comment by Ms. Hahn, or maybe a motion?
I was going to just say that I think it's a great project and appreciated the wonderful presentation, and wanted to make a motion to adopt the resolution to provide authorization to disperse up to $255,000 to Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy to develop schematic designs to enhance Bothine Marsh Open Space Preserve and realign a segment of the Bay Trail in Marin County.
And if we could have a second?
Second by
Mr. Peskin. If you would kindly call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Bieber?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
Okay, this motion passes. Agenda number 9 is approved.
Our next grant item concerns the Candlestick Point Stewardship Project. And we'll have Erica Johnson brief us on this project.
Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Pine, Restoration Authority board members, and members of the public. My name is Erica Johnson, and today I am recommending that the authority disperse up to $100,000 through the Community Grants Program to Literacy for Environmental Justice for restoration activities in the Candlestick Point State Recreation Area. Candlestick Point State Recreation Area is located along the highly urbanized southeastern shoreline of San Francisco. Adjacent to the park are the residents of the Bayview Hunters Point community, who have suffered from the impacts of industrial pollution and racial and class discrimination. The community remains one of the most economically disadvantaged in San Francisco. Prior to industrial development, the shoreline was a thriving ecosystem which encompassed tidal wetlands and adjacent upland habitats that were stewarded by the Ohlone people. From the late 1800s to the early 2000s, the shoreline experienced years of heavy industrial development, such as the establishment of shipyards and power plants, as well as illegal dumping that left the site polluted. With the help of community activism, state parks purchased the 170-acre landfill site along the shoreline in 1977, which became part of the Candlestick Point State Recreation Area. The grantee for this project is Literacy for Environmental Justice, also known as LEDGE. This is a community-based organization that serves the Bayview Hunters Point community by promoting ecological health, environmental stewardship, and workforce development that directly benefit community members. Ledge, in partnership with state parks, has stewarded the area since its remediation and public access developments. Candlestick Point still has some unique challenges due to its history of use for illegal dumping and its location in an economically disadvantaged community. In light of COVID-19, enforcement against destructive and illegal activities has diminished. This resulted in an increase of destructive activities and encampments within the park boundaries. These encampments have since been removed, but illegal dumping and littering still occur in the area. The proposed project will include trash cleanup, as well as monitoring and reporting of destructive activities to authorities and the Bayview Hunters Point Environmental Justice Task Force. The task force is a community-led problem-solving collaboration that brings together residents, community-based organizations, businesses, and government agencies once a month to discuss and respond to reports of pollution and other destructive activities. The project will also include workforce development training and the revegetation of Sunrise Point, the restoration site within the park. The initial phases of restoration at Sunrise Point occurred from 2012 to 2015, during which time Ledge restored 2.5 acres of habitat. Although Ledge has worked to restore Sunrise Point for several years, the restoration is about 50% complete. This project will focus primarily on revegetating approximately 2 acres of upland habitat adjacent to the baylands. The upland habitats are comprised of coastal sage scrub and grassland, which support wildlife such as the California ground squirrel, gopher snake, and jackrabbit. Many other species that use bayland habitats also use adjacent uplands for foraging, nesting, or roosting. Currently, the understory of the restoration site is covered in invasive plants. This project will remove the invasive plants and plant approximately 6,500 native plants grown at Ledge's native plant nursery. With this project, Sunrise Point restoration will be 75% complete. In addition, Ledge will recruit 12 transition youth. The transition youth are ages 18 through 25, and they'll be from the Bayview Hunters Point community and participate in the Eco Apprentice program. The program provides paid training and work experience in native plant propagation, ecosystem restoration, environmental education, and community organizing. Eco Apprentices will plan and lead monthly community stewardship days at Ledge's native plant nurseries and at the restoration sites to implement the project. About 1,000 volunteers are expected to be engaged over the course of the project, and together with Ledge staff and Eco Apprentices, they will remove trash from wetland habitats and marsh upland transition zones throughout the park, remove invasive plants at Sunrise Point, such as Bermuda grass, wild mustard, and Russian star thistle, and plant native flowering plants and grasses such as yarrow, sticky monkey flower, California fescue, and purple needle grass. Ledge, in collaboration with state parks and the community task force, will also train eco apprentices and community volunteers to report illegal dumping or other destructive activities in the Candlestick Point area. Here today is Dr. Hollis Pierce Jenkins, Executive Director from Literacy for Environmental Justice. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Really impressive project. Quite amazing that up to 1,000 volunteers would be involved. Let's check in with the board for their questions and comments. I see Mr. Peskin raising his hand.
I think many of us actually went on a tour at Heron's Head and met the folks at Ledge. I can't remember, because this COVID thing is compressing and expanding time, but I think it was before COVID, over to 900 Innis, which we funded, and saw the incredible work that Ledge is doing in the community. And I think this is just a wonderful opportunity, and subject to public comment, would be happy to make a motion.
Let's check to see if we have Well, first we'll call on Ms. Holman. You had a, excuse me, yes, Ms. Holman, you had a comment.
Just a quick, it carries on with yours about 1,000 volunteers. What's the basis for expecting 1,000 volunteers? That's beyond impressive.
I'll try to answer this question. Dr. Hollis Pierce-Jenkins is also in the audience if you want to add on. There are monthly community volunteer days that Ledge supports, and then they put on a large volunteer event for Earth Day. And so I think their estimate for the project that will occur over the course of about 2 years, they expect at least 30 volunteers or more each volunteer day. And it's based on previous turnout.
Very impressive, and thank you.
Turn to the public. Any public comment?
We do have one.
Okay, let's allow that person to speak. I don't see the hand.
Let's see. I think we're moving them over, or maybe they did not raise their hand anymore.
I think Dr. Hollis Pierce-Jenkins want to move over to panelist.
Moving them over now.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Pierce-Jenkins.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. I just wanted to introduce myself and thank you for supporting our work, because I have only been the executive director for 11 days. And so I am great in gratitude for Erica to inviting me to this first meeting. And I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. Congratulations on your appointment. I think we can come back to the board, and Mr. Peskin was prepared to make a motion.
So I would like to move the community grant for the Candlestick Point stewardship project to Ledge in the amount of $100,000.
And I'm excited to support that.
Great. We have a motion and a second. If we could call the roll.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Bieber?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
Okay, this motion passes. Agenda number 10 is approved.
All right, very good. Moving to item 11, which is an update to our Oversight Committee procedural document. Erin McDowell.
Good afternoon, Chair Pine and governing board members. If you remember, in 2017, the initial, the procedural for the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee was last updated. So now we're recommending an update to the procedural with respect to the stipend policy and also the reappointment of members to second terms. So the update to the stipend policy would allow for a $100 stipend for members from either low income representatives or also from nonprofits that are not able to pay for participation. This would be in line with the equity recommendations that was looking to provide more diversity on the advisory committee, oversight committee, and also the governing board. The second change is with respect to appointing members to a second term. These would be members that the general term for the oversight committee members is 3 years. And if members fill an empty spot, they would only serve a partial term. So if members serve less than half of a 3-year term, the recommendation would be to allow them to be reappointed without doing an open call for statements of interest and having them submit a full application. We also just removed some language for the initiation of the committee that talked about the staggered terms for the 6 members, since we're now established and those staggered terms have been implemented. So staff recommends that the authority adopt Resolution 81, amending the Oversight Committee procedural document. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Quick question. Do we have any of our advisory members who are able to avail themselves of the stipends at this time?
Yes, we do. We have, I think, 4 or 5 who currently receive stipends. Yeah.
All right, that's good to hear. Ms. Holman?
Yeah, I support the principle of this and probably will support the motion, but just sometimes it can be a little tricky. People don't always want to raise their hands and say, hey, I'm low income. It's easier if someone is representing an organization or a nonprofit that isn't particularly well funded. That's not a personal or a private matter. But so can you just help me understand like how this process would work so that someone isn't just like saying, hey, it's me?
This would be a private request to staff after the member is appointed to get a stipend. And I believe that's how it's done on the advisory committee. So it's not, I guess it's not discussed at the meeting. They apply and fill out a form.
Yeah, it still can be a little bit of but how else do you do it? It can still be a little bit of a challenge, if not embarrassment, to say I'm low income. So I guess I'd leave it to you to say that it's a respectful process. But does it seem like everyone who, and how would you know that anyone who is could avail themselves of this is? And again, how would you really know? But do you have any thoughts about that?
Are you asking about the oversight committee or the advisory committee? Because the advisory committee currently has that procedure in place, and I think Jessica can talk to that. We haven't had this procedure for the oversight committee. Actually, the initial procedural document had the stipend in there, and it was removed prior to the committee being formed.
Yeah. So, and my question would have applied to both, the one that has it now and the one that doesn't have it yet. It's like, how would one know if people who really could avail themselves of it do, and just assuming it's a respectful process? So,
yeah.
Maybe Jessica can answer.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your concern about that. And I think one of the ways we've handled that is not to set a specific income level. It's really just if they want the stipend. And the people who have chosen it, they have either been working for a small community-based nonprofit, or they're independent, maybe they're retired or something like that. So we don't ask any questions about their income level. It's just, it's $100. So it's not a huge amount. Right. It's a stipend. It's not like an hourly rate or a reimbursement. So it makes it pretty simple. We're not asking them a lot of questions. They just sign one form and then they get the checks if they show up for the meetings. So yeah.
That is helpful. Thank you. Sure. And I'm glad you appreciate the sensitivity.
Ms. Hahn, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I really appreciate Director Holman's raising this. I think it's a very valid point. And I guess my question is, we're talking about very de minimis amounts of money. And I'm wondering if it might not be better to switch it over to a policy where it is everybody gets the stipend, but you can decline it. And that would mean that those who are for whom that stipend is not meaningful, they could decline it, maybe just with a little checkbox on a form. And then you would automatically issue checks to everyone who did not decline it. And really, it's such a de minimis amount of money for the agency that it just seems, why bother having it be an opt-in? Maybe a couple $100s a year will be given to people who might not have applied for it, but then it makes it so that those who might have been intimidated or, you know, had some kind of small amount of a barrier around applying are getting it. I would advocate for an opt-out rather than opt-in.
Ms. Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, having served on the advisory committee, that we were very warmly invited to avail ourselves of it if it was something that we felt that we would like to have. And I think, and staff might be remembering this in a different way, but we had a couple of emails at least telling us, if you'd like to take advantage of this, this is how you do it. And then in the meeting as well, a couple of times it was said, this is available for all of us. So if you'd like to, if you're interested and you'd like to have it, here's what you do, here's how you follow the email. So it was, I felt it was never presented as if you're really in duress, you know, you can get this. It was just, this is a thing that's available. And so we'd like to warmly invite you to take advantage of it if you're interested.
This is Amy. I just wanted to chime in. I think we could go back and look at the language in the procedurals for both the Oversight Committee and Advisory Committee. I don't think we could revise it right now for approval. I think one thing we really need to think about is many of the Advisory Committee members work for public agencies, so they would immediately be opted out. So I think we'd have to, you know, address that, but maybe there is some language in the procedurals for both committees that switch it more to an opt-in system. Or am I getting that? I might be doing that backwards. Anyway, that you would be in unless you asked to be out.
I will add to that, probably the more urgent part of the changes would be to the member reappointments. We could bring that procedural back in December if we wanted to rework that language. The Oversight Committee will not be meeting probably until after the February board meeting. And so if we bring the second part back, if you want us to rework that language, we can do that. The reappointment language is a little more urgent in that we're hoping to appoint second terms at the December board meeting. And we did borrow, the language we borrowed for the stipend policy was very similar, if not the same language that's currently in the Advisory Committee procedural document.
Okay, so maybe we should just check in on what guidance the board wants to provide on this opt-in versus opt-out. You know, currently we have this opt-in approach, which Ms. Lever described as her experience with that. I'm personally comfortable leaving it as opt-in. I don't feel terribly strongly about it, but maybe we should just check in with the other. I'd like to just check in with the rest of the board. Ms. Holman or Mr. Peskin?
I don't feel strongly.
Yeah, in a perfect world, I think it would be an opt-out, but it's also such a small amount of money to send staff back to rework it. Seems like a lot of work. Hearing Sally's experience with it also, it sounds like it works pretty smoothly. It may not be ideal, but I'm not sure that it's a big issue. In a perfect world, like I say, it would be the opt out, but I'm okay going forward the way it is now, given that it does seem like it's working okay.
Okay. Well, I would suggest then, and I could go ahead and move that we adopt the procedural document as recommended. Ms. Hahn, you have your hand up. Would you like to add extra comment?
Yeah, I will second your motion. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to support this today. I will just add, I guess I'll put myself on another end of the spectrum, but I think we don't know who the opt-in is uncomfortable for. The fact that any of us might be comfortable with it probably isn't a great measure. And to the extent that we really want to emphasize equity and inclusivity in this agency, I would rather err on the side of giving a few $100s out to people who didn't need it than not have the most welcoming, open-armed policy, especially if we want to bring more diversity and different voices to these different boards. I think it can actually be a little bit uncomfortable for people who are taking care of children, elderly people and their families, holding down a job, and we want them to serve for free on a community board. So I'm just going to say that I would love to see, I understand there's some questions about not wanting to double compensate people whose agencies will already support them, but I would really like to see a policy come back that is an opt-out for whatever the universe of people that are not covered by their own agencies. So, but I'm happy to support this today. I don't think.
I just wanted to add for a few side comments, the oversight committee, the advisory committee does have publicly government agency people on the committee. That is not allowed for the oversight committee. So you cannot be working for a public agency or be an elected official and serve on the oversight committee. So there's different requirements. The other thing, this doesn't impact the decision, but if people do choose to get the stipend, they will need to fill out, some financial paperwork so they can get checks cut to them. But we're happy to go with whatever the board recommends with respect to this policy. I just wanted to clarify that there are no public workers on the oversight committee.
Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Lieber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe if you as the maker and the seconder of the motion would like to add on to the motion, bringing back consideration of an opt-out policy, I think it is more impactful for the oversight than the advisory committee.
I'd be happy to add that amendment. I think you make a good point. The oversight committee is much smaller. It tends to be a lot of retired folks. Happy to have that motion amended. And I'm not sure if we had a second.
Yeah, I seconded that. And just for clarification, so we have established that it just isn't relevant for one of the bodies, and that's why we're excluding it. Or was it?
I think the idea would be we'd approve it today and would bring back for future consideration whether to go to an opt-out for both boards.
Excellent, thank you. I'm very happy to include that. And thank you to Director Holman again for raising that.
Let me just check in from public comment. Do not see any hands raised today.
No hands, sir. Did we have a motion? I'm sorry, who motioned?
I made the motion and it was seconded by Director Hahn.
All right, so I am going to
call the roll.
All right. So Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda number 11 is approved.
Thank you. Item 12 is the appointment of a new advisory committee member. This one is is very straightforward. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is designating a new member, Mr. Greg Martinelli. Jessica Davenport, do you have any additional background to add?
Sure, thank you, Chair Pine. So Greg Erickson, the director of the Bay Delta region of CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, retired a few months ago. He had been the department's representative on the advisory committee, and we subsequently requested that the department nominate someone to fill his role. And they chose Greg Martinelli, who actually did serve on the advisory committee a few years back. And Greg is the environmental program manager for the wildlife and lands programs in the Bay Delta region. And his programs are responsible for managing, enhancing, and restoring over 150,000 acres around the edge of the bay.
Okay, very good. If we could we can entertain a motion for that appointment.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Hahn, seconded by Mr. Peskin. We'll quickly check for public comment. Don't see any hands raised, so we can call the vote on this item.
Sure. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
All right, this motion passes. Agenda number 12 is approved.
Okay, very good. Our next item is informational, but a very critical one concerning project management challenges. Our interim executive officer, Amy Hustle, will lead us off on this.
Great. Thank you, Chair Pine and members of the board and members of the public who are joining us. I'm going to be talking about why everything takes longer than you think it should. So the various challenges that face our restoration projects. And we're doing this in response to the board's request and specifically the board's interest and concerns about the South San Francisco Bay shoreline project. So we're going to focus heavily on the shoreline project, but then talk about some different categories of delays and different examples of projects that have faced those. The next slide. So an overview of challenges broadly that projects have faced include the bid process. So putting a project out for bid and having qualified bids within your budgeted amount. The permitting challenges, which is why we put together the regulatory integration team. Technical assistance issues and needs, funding shortfalls. So even if the authority is putting funding in, if there's other, pending grants or anticipated funding, or if project costs increase and the funding is not there. And then some of the pandemic impacts on projects moving forward. So next slide. So the South San Francisco Bay shoreline project, this is a nearly 20-year effort at this point and a partnership between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the State Coastal Conservancy, and Valley Water. And ultimately, the project will include construction of a 4-mile levee that goes from the Guadalupe River to Coyote Creek and ties into levees along each of those creeks. That levee will have ecotone, that's the area shown in yellow or gold on the map. So a transitional habitat between the levee and the tidal marsh. And then the construction of the levee enables 3,000 acres of former commercial salt ponds to be breached to the bay, open to the tidal waters of the bay, and restored to tidal wetlands. And then there's also improvements to public access, completion of the Bay Trail through the project site, for example. Next slide. So you can imagine over a 15, 20-year planning horizon, the project has faced many different issues. And first and foremost, working with the Corps of Engineers, you go through a lengthy planning process seeking federal authorization and then appropriations. We surmounted those hurdles and we're very excited to be included in the work plan for the Bipartisan Budget Act. There were also, over the years, many different opinions on exact levee alignments and on the levee height. We spent quite a bit of time debating with the Corps of Engineers at their headquarters level about sea level rise projections to use for designing the levee. And then we have a couple things we have to cross with the levee, including the Union Pacific Railroad and the outfall for the regional wastewater facility in the South Bay, which is the largest wastewater facility, I think, west of the Mississippi. It serves like 1.4 million people in the South Bay. There were lots of debates about the recreational elements and what the exact trail routing should be. Obviously, you know, the permitting, the environmental review and permitting took quite a bit of time and was, you know, the permitting is related to many of these issues. What should the exact levee alignment be? And then the bid process was kind of our most recent hurdle. And the Corps has, in the last couple of months, awarded a contract for about $129 million using the federal funding, Valley Water funding, and Measure AA funding to build the first 3 reaches of the levee from Alviso Marina to the outfall of the treatment plant. That same construction project was put out to bid in 2020, and all of the bids that came in exceeded the government estimate. So the Corps had to reject the bids, go back to the drawing board in terms of cost estimating, and put it back out to bid. The Corps can only award a contract that is within a certain percentage over of the government cost estimate. So unfortunately, it was greater than that in the first bid round. They rejected all of them. But in the second bid round, they had a bid that was within the government cost estimate, and they've awarded that contract. Next slide. So even with construction of these first 3 reaches of the levee, there are continued struggles that the project is facing in order to construct the entire 4-mile reach of the levee and enable restoration of the 3,000 acres of salt ponds. And I guess first and foremost, what we've learned is that the cost of sediment for levee construction is significantly higher than anticipated. And the sediment has to meet really stringent sediment quality and characteristic requirements. Part of this comes from what occurred after Hurricane Katrina and the Corps of Engineers looking at their requirements for sediment characteristics. And part of this is about contaminants and making sure the sediment is meeting very stringent contaminant levels. So between these requirements, you end up with very limited sources of sediment that you can tap into. And I would say this does not bode well for flood management in the San Francisco Bay Area generally. If we're going to have, you know, this level of issue finding sediment to build the levees. So that's a major issue. We do have two other cost issues moving forward with the last two reaches of the levee. One is ongoing discussions with the city of San Jose about the transfer of real estate. They acquired Pond A18 back in the early 2000s, and Pond A18 is a portion of this project. We'd be building the levee behind Pond A18. And initially, we had thought that the city would transfer the real estate at no cost to the project. They are now requesting approximately $27 million for the real estate. And then PG&E has transmission lines that go through the pond. You can kind of see them in that red circle. And they are requesting $30 million in order to raise the transmission towers that go through Pond A18. So we are in negotiations with both of these entities to work to bring down costs to levels that the Corps, Valley Water, and the Conservancy and Authority can afford. So that's the summary of the Shoreline project. I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, who can talk more broadly about these issues.
Thank you, Amy. So you heard about the bid process issues with the Shoreline, and but also some other projects have had hiccups with their bid processes. In the Deer Island Basin project in Marin, shown at left, a delay occurred because all bids exceeded the budget, and the grantee, the County of Marin, had to rescope the project. This is a planning project, and negotiate with the bidders to come to an acceptable scope and cost. And then in the 900 Innis remediation project, after the initial bid process for the remediation work in June of last year, the lowest bidder withdrew, and the city decided to rebid the project in November of last year. So then the grantee, that's the San Francisco Rec and Park Department, did select a contractor. Staff authorized construction to begin in April of this year, and a groundbreaking ceremony was held this past June, as shown at the right. So as Amy mentioned, permitting challenges have been well known for a while, and that's why the BRIT was created. And you heard a presentation from the BRIT at your last meeting. However, the BRIT is made up of state and federal permitting agencies and can't help with obtaining local government permits. And we'd like to bring to the board's attention the South Bay Salt Ponds Restoration Project's permitting challenge. So the project management team for the Salt Ponds restoration has been working with the City of Mountain View's staff for over 6 years, but has not yet received the necessary permits, easements, and agreements. As a result, the opportunity to import and place substantial amounts of available fill material has been lost, and some external grant funding, not the authority's funding, but other grants, has expired. The project team has contacted members of the Mountain View City Council to try to expedite this process. And the city recently issued a temporary permit and license agreement to allow initial import and stockpiling of fill material, but the permanent easements and other issues that would enable the project to be constructed before the remaining funds expire are still unresolved. In the interest of time, I won't go into the Walnut Creek project example of permitting, but it is in the memo, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. Several projects have required technical assistance from authority staff. We've provided our own expertise and suggested other experts to serve on technical advisory committees for projects. These committees help ensure that projects are optimized to achieve significant ecological benefits while also addressing flood protection, shoreline stabilization, and public access needs. The Herons Head Park Shoreline Resilience Project is an example of a project that was delayed due to insufficient funding. In order to move the project forward while the Port of San Francisco applied for additional grants, we worked with the Port to divide the project into 2 phases, and the authority funded the first phase in July of 2020. The Port recently obtained grants to cover most of the costs of constructing the hard elements of the project, which you can see are these structures extending out into the bay. There'll be a new gravel beach, and those are being funded by other funders. And the Port will be able to access its own capital funds to fill any funding gaps. So we expect to bring a staff recommendation for the second phase of this project next year, and it will include oyster reef placement and additional habitat stewardship and monitoring. The pandemic has resulted in a wide range of delays and changes in scope, as noted on the slide, which I won't read, but again, happy to answer questions. In conclusion, despite the challenges, authority projects are achieving important gains for bay restoration and associated public access and flood protection. We continue to work in partnership with our grantees to move these projects forward. We appreciate the interest and support of the governing board and would be happy to provide additional information as needed. Thank you, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you, Amy and Jessica, for those overview. A lot of sobering news there. I'm back to the board for questions. Ms. Hahn?
Okay, I'm feeling like I'm dominating the time here, but
No problem.
First of all, I think this is a great report. I'm going to suggest to my own city manager that we get reports like this now and then, because I think it's very helpful to know exactly what is it that hinders some of the, the work of an agency. And so I just want to tell you how much I appreciate this. On the permitting challenges, you guys have put together this incredible Brit, and I just commend all those who had that brilliant idea and made it happen. I was wondering on these issues of delays that then result in some other funding sources falling through, and I always kind of think of funding for things like this, in particular affordable housing, we have this problem, as like a waiter or wait person with a big tray that's like trying to assemble all these things on that tray. And while they're putting some on, others fall off, and then they need to get those back on, and they're running around, right, trying to do this. And then eventually somehow they need everything on the tray in the right order, and they can, just really difficult to do. And to the extent that this model of the Brit is been really successful, I'm wondering if on these projects that have multiple funding sources, if the authority might want to create kind of a new function for itself of convening the various funding agencies on that specific project, including the private not-for-profit funders, and kind of maybe running every 6 months a check-in or something, and sort of being the herder of helping the project keep all those funding agencies on board and working through the conflicts and the different timelines and the clawbacks and things that different funding sources have. Because it seems like it's really a very successful way to get everybody in the room and make sure that these kind of small technical differences between different funding sources don't hamper the possibility of moving projects, which obviously everybody supports, right? Everybody at one time put money forward for them. So that's just an idea. Maybe bring that concept down to a project by project and be the initiator of that. Because I'm not sure, sometimes the agencies that we're funding don't necessarily have the capacity to kind of do that herding themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And, you know, I think the funders where you run into the challenges with expiring funds are typically the state and federal agencies. And I know, you know, at Resources Agency, this Cutting Green Tape initiative includes both looking at the regulatory side, but also looking at the state funding side of the equation. And, you know, like with the Mountain View example, it was state funding that it just reached its expiration dates.
But it also sounds like maybe there wasn't a lot of tending of the fires there. I don't know what the issues were, but I'm just saying if we can maybe initiate providing some of that support, or just being the one who kind of like knocks on the door and says, hey, let's take a look at where we are with our permitting and how that interfaces with funding, and the state deadlines are coming up, and who could we talk to at the state, and I don't know.
Yeah. I think we can offer that help. And I like that wait staff analogy. And I'm sure some of the project managers who have worked on these projects definitely feel that way when they're trying to assemble all the permits and keep the funding from falling off the tray. So yeah, I think we can, I don't know that we're going to be able to solve the problems all the time, especially like with expiring state or federal funds, but we can provide assistance to projects.
I wanted to come back to the question of the sediment or the landfill supply, the dirt supply. You know, it sounds like a lot of the issue is just the standards for the material. Is there any debate over whether those standards should be relaxed somewhat?
I think that is worth investigating. I don't know that like relaxing the standards on the sediment characteristics is all that doable, because we want levees that aren't going to degrade. But in terms of the contaminant levels, I think there are things that we can look into. You know, putting, they did this at Montezuma with dredge sediment, but if you're putting, you know, sediment with higher contaminant levels, but completely encapsulating it within clean sediment, there could be opportunities. And I know it's a, you know, it's a sensitive topic to talk about contaminant levels in sediment in you know, adjacent to San Francisco Bay, but right. We're going to run out of places to tap into for sediment.
And we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments from the board or questions? Can check for members of the public.
No public comment on my side.
Okay, well, that was an information item. And we can move now to our next item, which is also informational, which is an update on implementation and equity recommendations. I believe Linda Tong will walk us through this.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, again. Staff is providing an update in response to Resolution 70 accepting Restoration Authority Advisory Committee recommendations for implementing Measure AA in a manner that benefits economically disadvantaged communities. That was passed on July 17th, 2020. The resolution acknowledges the input of community leaders and the advisory committee, accepts the equity recommendations of the advisory committee, and directs staff to report back annually on progress in implementing these recommendations. The authority has implemented the equity recommendations in several ways, such as through updating the grant program materials and processes. In July of 2020, staff released a revised set of grant program materials for the 4th round of Measure AA's grant program. One clear change was the allocation of points for a project's level of community involvement and benefits when evaluating applications. The materials for the grant round were also revised so that guidance on project eligibility and evaluation criteria were clearer, and applicants could consult with authority staff on projects before submitting a full grant application. And for 2021, the 5th round of grant materials followed a similar template with a few updates and formatting changes. We've also authorized, the authority has also authorized the creation of a community grants program, and it's now in its 2nd year. And this program specifically funds community-based organizations in economically disadvantaged communities. So one example is the Marin City Urban Wetland Community Visioning Project. And that's funding a grassroots organization to engage community members in helping to shape the design of a local restoration project. And this budget for the project includes stipends for community advocates to educate other residents about local environmental issues and the restoration project designs. We've also undertaken some efforts to reach more community-based organizations and connect them with restoration-focused orgs, and have more informal conversations about authority funding. So staff has hosted several informal virtual networking sessions. In 2020, we started our first set of networking sessions. And in September of 2021, we hosted another set of networking sessions. And this round, in addition to networking time, we provided some brief overviews of our grant programs to new audiences, and we invited some current grantees to share their experiences with forming partnerships for these projects and also in receiving our grants. We've also updated some of our funding policies to lower barriers to community participation. During the pre-application consultation for our regular grant round, we encourage applicants to include funding in their budgets for paid community participation or workforce development for residents of economically disadvantaged communities, if feasible. And we're also implementing a process to advance funds to grantees that don't have the resources to cover project costs upfront, since our grants generally reimburse grantees after they've done project activities. And in implementing the advisory committee's equity recommendations, we've looked to community-based orgs, especially those in economically disadvantaged communities, to guide our work. Since community-based organizations bring a history of building strong relationships with residents and really elevating community needs. So for example, we've worked with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project to refine a project that serves as an educational program and community-led planning process to Oakland residents so they can become more engaged in shoreline restoration projects. And traditional restoration focused organizations also play a critical role in implementing our equity recommendations. And these traditional restoration-focused organizations, such as government agencies and special districts, bring a history of strong restoration expertise in planning and implementation, and they can be really valuable partners for orgs with less restoration experience. So for example, in the city of San Rafael, the North Marin Audubon Society has worked with the Canal Neighborhood's local organization, Multicultural Center of Marin, to inform and engage residents on the planning of tidal wetland restoration at Tuscarnia Marsh. And in the coming year, we will continue to be guided by the equity recommendations, and we'll look for opportunities to implement some that haven't been addressed yet. Staff want to visit economically disadvantaged communities residing along the Bay shoreline with the governing board and advisory committee to better understand issues and opportunities to support them. Tours have been limited during the pandemic, but we're looking forward to continuing them, and we'll include community representatives as speakers during these tours. And we'll also think about ways to more directly involve community participants in the grant process. And we think that the best opportunity to do this will likely be through adding more community members to the advisory committee. Sorry. We'll also be establishing a communication strategy that fosters relevance to communities through better understanding needs and priorities of underrepresented groups. And we want to pursue this in the next fiscal year, 2022 to 23, after we've gained more experience in working with community organizations and have more examples to share in our communications work. And staff also recognizes that engagement with tribes wasn't included in the advisory committee equity recommendations, since government relationships with tribes require additional separate attention. But staff will aim to initiate outreach to Bay Area tribes to involve them in the authority's work in a meaningful way. And this may include acknowledging our being on tribal lands, including tribal perspectives and leadership in our projects, and providing tribes with resources to conduct projects under our funding programs. And finally, staff is interested in engaging members of the advisory committee and governing board in developing and adopting equity guidelines for the agency. We may want to build on the work of the State Coastal Conservancy, which has already adopted justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion guidelines. Staff is seeking direction from the governing board on whether to start the process of preparing similar guidelines for adoption by the authority. And we really appreciate the governing board's interest in improving equity in the authority's programs and processes, and we welcome your feedback and direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for the presentation. And thank you for your memo, which was very comprehensive. It was really helpful to kind of look at the matrix of the recommendations and the progress to date. And a lot of progress has been made. I turn to my colleagues for their questions or comments.
Chair Pine. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw.
No, you please go first.
Just relative to a tribal consultation policy, which has been adopted by other organizations like the Coastal Commission, is there any contemplation by staff or this governing board of adopting a tribal consultation policy?
I can respond for staff. We have talked about this. We haven't implemented anything, and we're thinking about following the conservancy model of reaching out to tribes when we're preparing to do like a staff report to ask for funding authorization. But there may be other better ways to involve tribes as well.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different models to work with, but I certainly would encourage us to, whether it's the Coastal Conservancy model or the Coastal Commission model, which is difficult because the Bay Area has very, very few federally recognized tribes. But I think having some kind of consultation policy that is ultimately adopted by the governing board is the right thing to do.
Thank you for that comment.
Councilmember Hahn.
Thank you. I appreciate and support the idea that Supervisor Peskin put forward. I just wanted to say that I am very interested in supporting the near-term goal of visiting economically disadvantaged communities on the Bay shoreline, and would like to offer myself up as ready, willing, and able to participate in that. And I think the little rubric under which I'm on this board is the Bay Cities seat. And so I'm particularly wanting to make myself available to partner with you on that and show up as needed.
Thank you for that offer.
And I'm really excited about this work. And I will ditto my comments from the last report. I'm just very impressed with the quality of thinking and work and intention, but also just what you present to us, and how really well organized and tracked, and everything translated into actionable items rather than just a vague statement of commitment, which I don't think gets anyone anywhere. So I really want to join my colleagues in commending you for this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
While we are lauding staff, I just wanted to join in and say that yesterday we were having a hearing at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors on our relatively new, not that new, but 5-year-old program to expand the urban tree canopy, which the voters voted for. And I actually invoked the Bay Restoration Authority and our staff as the model for showing promises made, promises kept, and the metrics that we hear every one of our meetings, and was encouraging our city staff to take a page out of the Bay Restoration Authority's book. So hats off to staff.
I sent 2 of your reports to our city manager during the meeting.
So life goes on without Sam Shuckett. Let the record show.
Kudos to the staff.
I'm sure all these city staff just love us now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you guys are in deep trouble.
Well, they juggle a few more things. I think it might be easier to be an agency with like a very single mandate, but nevertheless, it's really great quality work.
All right, let's just check in to see if the public has any comments on this. We do have one hand raised from Ms. Horowitz McCann.
She's moving in now.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm not exactly a general member of the public because I'm the vice chair of your advisory committee. I am assistant executive officer at San Francisco Bay Water Board, and I just wanted to front load. You'll hear this in a moment from Jessica Martini-Lamb when she gives you the advisory committee report, but we're reinvigorating the ad hoc committee on equity. So you not only have your wonderful staff, but you now have some key members of the advisory committee who want to dig a little deeper to help guide and support all of you in this important work. And many of us that are on that ad hoc committee have experience and are working in the same spaces in our own organizations and in communities. So the capacity to continue and be successful in this realm with equity activities is totally available to you and an exciting moment in time. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And the advisory committee has been instrumental in pushing forward this work. It's really done a great job to date, and glad to hear that the advisory committee continues to be so engaged in these issues. All right, I think we're prepared to move on to our update from the advisory committee chair. That's Jessica Martini-Lamb.
Thank you, Chair Pine and board members. I'd just like to pile on the kudos to Restoration Authority staff who also provide excellent support to the advisory committee, and I greatly appreciate their help in my transition to chair this year. So they're just a stellar group of people to work with. I wanted to give you a brief summary of the advisory committee's most recent meeting, which was held on September 10th. And as Lisa mentioned, the AC is reconvening the Equity Ad Hoc Committee, and that'll be led by Lisa. The call has been made for interested AC members to join the ad hoc, and we've had a number of members already join. And we're reconvening this to the ad hoc to assess the authority's progress to date in implementing the AC's equity recommendations, and also to provide additional advice and suggestions for the full AC to consider supporting as we move forward with implementation of the recommendations. And we plan on agendizing the Equity Ad Hoc's work at our next meeting in November. At the last meeting, Taylor Samuelson also provided an update on the communication and performance measures, including the draft, or the no longer draft, but the one-pager summary of the annual report that you all saw earlier in the meeting. And the AC has formed an ad hoc to assist with the review of the next annual report. And a call has been made for AC members to join that ad hoc. And we've had a number of folks already volunteer. We also received an informational update on the Sediment for Survival report, which I believe the board has heard previously in meetings. And then finally, the AC received a presentation on the Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program's draft funding proposal. And the presenters were Caitlin Sweeney, and Heidi Nutters, and Tony Hale, and they reviewed progress to date regarding the development of the WRMP, background on its core aspects and importance to the WRMP's regional approach, and then as well as plans for their next steps. Details of the draft funding proposal that will be coming to the authority's board were also presented. And AC members asked questions and provided comments on the draft funding proposal. I'd be happy to share some of those if the board is interested today. Otherwise, I'll plan on providing some update when that item is presented to the board in the future. And then following questions and discussion from the AC reached consensus on recommending support of the draft funding proposal for the WRMP. And our next meeting is scheduled for Friday, November 19th. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your report. Do we have any questions today for Ms. Martini-Lamb? I don't see any questions, so we can move to our final item today, which is use of mitigation funds on property used for authority projects.
Thank you, Chair Pine. Happy to speak to you again on another item. So this is an information item so that you're aware of the staff's approach to the use of mitigation funds on property used for authority projects. The staff has developed the guidance for grantees based on similar guidance developed by the State Coastal Conservancy. I'd like to be very clear that the authority avoids funding mitigation, which is the responsibility of the company or agency that is creating an environmental impact. However, accepting mitigation funds will not necessarily make a project ineligible for funds from the authority. The authority has adopted a policy related to the use of mitigation funds found in the request for proposals, which requires that authority funds pay for an incremental improvement beyond compensation for damages elsewhere. This policy prevents the authority from subsidizing mitigation, but allows for flexibility in funding projects that use mitigation funds. So the ideal approach is for the authority to consider the use of mitigation funds prior to its approval of a project. However, it's possible that an authority grantee could request the use of mitigation funds after the authority funds a project. The memo provides a couple examples of each of these situations from the Coastal Conservancy's experience. For acquisitions and restoration projects funded by the authority, grantees are prohibited from using the property for mitigation without the prior approval of the authority's executive officer. And this requirement is included in all our grant agreements. The staff has created guidance that's intended to assist a grantee with the process for seeking authority approval of the grantee's proposal to use mitigation, for mitigation real property that the grantee has acquired or restored with funding under an authority grant. The grantee is required to first consult with the authority project manager and must then submit a proposal in writing for the executive officer's review. Various issues need to be addressed in the proposal and considered by the executive officer in determining whether permission to use mitigation funds will be granted. These include the nature of adverse environmental impact elsewhere for which the mitigation is intended to provide an offset or compensation, whether the project creating the impact is controversial, whether the mitigation results in an overall public benefit, and whether the mitigation requirement will advance or impede the authority's programmatic goals for the property. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you for the overview. An opportunity for some questions. I think everyone's probably a little hungry at this point, but see if we have any questions. Ms. Hahn?
I just want to say, I think it's very good to have a policy like this that clarifies and sort of carves out under what circumstances we might fund a project that also involves private party mitigations. And that, allows us the flexibility that doesn't create such a bright line that we can't participate if we find that it meets all of our criteria. And obviously those projects would still be coming to us, right? For approval, they would be part of that. So we as a board would have an opportunity to also evaluate whether we think on balance, it's better for us to be involved than not. So I just, it's a day of appreciation, I guess. I want to say thank you for bringing this thoughtful policy forward. And I look forward to seeing what projects might become available through this.
I guess I just want to clarify that you would be seeing it if they asked to use the mitigation funds prior to the project being approved. But let's say you approved funding for an acquisition, and then later that grantee wanted to use a portion of the property as mitigation, like to accept mitigation funds to restore a portion, then that would be under the staff's purview. So that's the approach.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
And I just wanted to also clarify that it's not just private entities mitigating. Much of the mitigation that occurs is public agencies doing other, public works projects.
Thanks for correcting that. I misspoke. No, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands raised. Checking with the public on this item.
No public.
All right, and that concludes item 16, guidance on accepted vacation funds, and brings us to the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance and participation. We'll see you on December 10th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, I guess, and Halloween.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye now.